My name is Gerard Call, and today I'm going to be talking with you about how to promote student learning by flipping the classroom. So there's a few topics we're going to go over today. The first one is we're going to be answering the question, what is a flipped classroom? Next, we'll go over some of the benefits and challenges of using a flipped classroom model, and then end with some tips for flipping the classroom for those of us who want to try using this technique in our own teaching. Let's begin with that first question of what is a flipped classroom? A flipped classroom is a type of blended learning environment where events that have traditionally taken place inside a classroom take place outside, and vice versa. So a blending learning environment is one where there are in-person aspects as well as online aspects, and they're being used together in conjunction. So this is different from maybe a class where students only work in the classroom with a teacher, and it's also different from an online focused class where there isn't ever any in-person teaching and learning. So let's start by comparing a flipped classroom to a traditional classroom design. So as you can see below, a traditional classroom has this emphasis on the face-to-face learning centering around a lecture. This lecture is where the teacher is typically standing in front of the room and presenting prepared information about the subject. So it's the idea that the teacher has the information and is then passing it on to the students. At this point, what happens next is the students are usually asked to do some kind of homework or other assignment after class to help apply and integrate that information into their lives moving forward. Well, a flipped classroom model takes this and flips these ideas. So instead, students are asked to cover that initial lecture piece independently on their own. Now this can look a little bit differently in flipped classroom settings, but the idea is the same. So instead of there being a room full of students and a teacher giving a lecture, oftentimes teachers will prepare video lectures where they'll record themselves delivering information in a classroom setting, maybe writing things on the board, kind of like they normally would in a typical teaching environment. Another common way of delivering this lecture material in flipped classroom settings is by doing narrated slideshows. So that's what I'm doing today, where I've created a slideshow and I'm walking you through it. But there are also plenty of other ways that this information can be delivered. So a few examples of that is maybe you assign your students to listen to a podcast that covers the material you want to dive deeper into in class. Or maybe you access some of these online free educational materials, such as those found through iTunes University or Khan Academy. Whatever the mechanism, the idea is that we ask students to try and learn the material on their own before class, and then we have them bring that information to class where we do our face-to-face learning. So in this flipped model, we use the time in class to do homework, or is probably more appropriately named, workshopping or in-class work. So these are the same kinds of assignments often that students would do after the fact, but we have them do it in class with us there so we can help provide support and encouragement and maybe help them dig a little bit deeper. Other really helpful and common face-to-face learning activities in a flipped model are using group projects or deeper discussion time so that we can take that information the students went over and dive a little bit deeper. Another way of thinking about this is by using Bloom's taxonomy. So in a traditional classroom, this is a way we can visualize the amount of energy and time we spend on different levels of Bloom's taxonomy in the face-to-face environment. So we can see at the bottom, these stripes down there are the biggest, remembering, understanding, and applying. And that's because that's where the bulk of our face-to-face time is being spent. We are sharing the lecture, we're giving the information, and maybe there's some application that we're working with students to do. In a flipped classroom model, however, this looks like this. So instead, you can see that now the big slices are up at the top, where most of the class time is being used for higher order learning activities, such as analyzing, evaluating, and creating. We ask that students do some of those bottom three things on their own before they come to class, so we can really focus on these higher order aspects of education when they're with us. So let's talk about, why do we maybe choose to use a flipped classroom? So one of the first benefits is that flipped classrooms allow for greater flexibility for students. This can be really important because students often have a lot of demands on their time, and being able to choose how and when they do pre-class activities can really help with that. So as an example, when I was in this recent flipped classroom as a student, the teacher gave us video lectures for us to watch before we came to class. And I actually found that the thing that was most helpful for me was if I would watch the video lectures when I was at the gym. And that was great for a few reasons. One, it was helpful because it gave me some time to be learning while also doing some important health promoting activities. But I actually also found that I was able to focus a little bit better on the content when I was doing my exercise. So that was kind of the solution that really worked well for me. Another important benefit is that this frees up valuable face-to-face time for more active learning activities with students. So as instructors, our time with the students in the classroom is some of the most important resources that we have. And while lectures can be meaningful and helpful, it's not the best use of our time. So when we take care of the lectures before class, we can invest in these active learning activities to try and promote more meaningful learning with our students. Another benefit is that when the students have their first contact with the material before class, it allows them to come up with some questions that they can ask during the class time. Now, of course, students can ask questions in a traditional classroom model as well, but what can happen sometimes is the students go to class, they hear the lecture, there's all this new information coming at them, and then after they leave, they come up with these questions and want to know more. And while there's always the option to reach out to the professor through email or other methods, sometimes that can feel a little bit uncomfortable, or it could be difficult to remember to do that. So having the material first and then the space with the teacher to ask those questions a little bit sooner can be helpful in promoting questions and deeper learning. And then I'd say another final benefit of flipped classrooms is it provides a space where instructors can give additional support for these higher order tasks that can be a little bit more mentally involved, which can reduce stress for students. So oftentimes, we might be asking students to apply or analyze the material, maybe in a group project or another setting, and it's helpful for us to be there to give support and feedback in the moment. And as we reduce the stress for students, that can remove an obstacle for learning for many students. There are, however, a number of challenges to using the flipped classroom model. One of the big ones is that it requires more upfront time for teacher preparation. It takes effort and planning to create a curriculum, to put together slides, to record a video, and oftentimes maybe we need to do it more than once and practice a little bit. And I do think it takes more effort and time. Some good news about that is because we put in this time up front, if we end up teaching a class again or a specific module, we can often reuse some of the material we've created for our out-of-class pre-learning activities. which can, in the long run, maybe actually reduce some of the time we spend if we teach classes multiple times. That said, I think it's really important to um, emphasize that while there might be a temptation to reuse some of these materials, it is key that we go back and revise materials to make sure that they stay relevant and that they're engaging for students. Another challenge is that technology itself can present barriers for students. Flipped classrooms tend to use more online and technology-based learning activities, and not every student has access to a personal computer or to a high-speed internet. As instructors, it's important that we help support students in accessing these things. So one suggestion would be maybe having set office times, particularly right before class, where students can come a little bit early, they can use computers, they can access whatever the learning activities are so that they can be prepared for class. Another thing to keep in mind is that videos or other online things can sometimes take up a significant amount of bandwidth or computer storage. And so for some people who don't have access to high-speed internet, it can be difficult to stream or download large files. That's kind of beyond the range of this lecture. So I'm not going to go over specifics, but I do encourage you to be mindful of issues like that. And then I'd say finally, one of the big challenges to flipped classrooms are students may not adequately prepare for class. This is particularly the case if our pre-class lectures are repetitive or boring. One way we can promote student preparation and engagement is making sure that our information is engaging. So I think it's particularly important for us as instructors to switch up how we present the pre-learning activities. So in this situation, I'm doing a narrated slideshow. If I were to continue teaching a course on this, I would potentially do a recorded video lecture next time. And then maybe I would select a podcast in tandem with a YouTube video for students to watch. Or maybe there's a community or campus event that's related to the topic, and I would ask students to go to that, take some notes about their experience, and write down a few questions that they had to go over with me and the rest of the class when we meet together. So now that we've gone over some of the challenges and benefits of a flipped classroom, I want to go over a few tips that can help make flipped classrooms successful. So the first is related to what we were just talking about, and that it's important to provide incentives for students to prepare for class. There's a number of things we can do, like I just talked about, switching up the material helps, but other suggestions include doing very simple and low stakes quizzes about the video lectures or other material that students can take on a weekly basis to refresh their memory and indicate that they completed the assignment. I do want to emphasize that I think it's important for quizzes in a situation like this to be very simple, to not be heavily weighted in terms of the final grade, because otherwise what can happen is the focus can become centered around the quizzes themselves instead of the pre-class learning activities or the in-class face-to-face activities. Another tip is I think it's helpful for us to hold space at the beginning of our face-to-face sessions to answer questions and to dive deeper into the video the information that was covered in the video lectures, but it's key to not simply repeat the lecture. This is something that I've seen a number of instructors do, and it's an easy trap to fall into. But if we have the students watch a video lecture and then have them come to class and essentially repeat or summarize what they've already watched, that's one of the surest ways to communicate to students that you don't really need to do the preparation because we're going to go over it in class anyway. And perhaps even more importantly, when we do that, we take up the time so we're not able to engage in these active and involved learning activities in class, which is really one of the key purposes for flipped classrooms. And then finally, it's important that we're intentional about the in-class activities. Flipped classrooms are all about using our face-to-face time effectively to really promote deep learning with the students and take them beyond some of those lower order learning activities. So helpful questions can be things like, what activities will help the students best apply the material that I had them watch? Or maybe I can think back to Bloom's taxonomy and say, okay, what types of activities will promote creating, evaluating, and analyzing the material? One example that I've seen is good is to have group and individual projects. In the class that I took a while ago, I mentioned, we did this. So we had video lectures where we watched each week, and then we came in and worked together in a small group to apply the materials that we had learned about to real life situations. And each week we did another step to kind of a big cumulative project that was applicable to the studies and how they work in the real world. So kind of as a summary, the flipped learning environment can be a great and novel way of engaging students, and it can help deep learning occur in a way that might be difficult to have in some traditional learning environments. And I'm excited for you to take some of the information we went over and apply it in class so that you can get a little bit of experience and hopefully try out a flipped classroom environment in your own sometime.